I don't think it has ever been as hard to get a job in a law firm as it is today. It's a very different world to even just a few years ago. More people now apply, more law firms have introduced tests even before you get to the interview, and the information that you need to know to get past each of those stages has gone up. Now today I'm going to talk about why it's so hard, but don't fret. I also want to talk about exactly what you should do in the law firm process to stand out. Today law firms get more applications than they ever did. I recently spoke to one of the mid-sized law firms. Now they get 4,000 applications a year for 25 places. A US firm that only recently started offering its training contracts in London, they got about 2,000 applications for about 10 places. And another firm told me they were already oversubscribed even before the time to submit your application had closed. Let me give you 4 reasons why. First, law firms have a much more visible online presence. In the last 2 years, the biggest law firms have invested so much in marketing to early talent, but especially with a presence on social media. So in addition to the normal milk round of law firms going to visit students on campuses, you see them everywhere online. And more awareness of a law firm, when to apply, how you find the application page, just means more students apply. Next, AI has meant more people can write applications quickly. I spoke to a law firm that said half the applications they received seemed to be written by AI or copy-pasted. Third, law was already an attractive profession, right? It's a common pathway that people go into. But the media awareness as a result of the rise in the salaries has only brought more attention to this, that people now think, oh, I should apply to become a lawyer. Next, and I appreciate UCLA has contributed to this, but the public information has gone up about law firms. So there's now more resources, more guides, more application answers than ever before. So when a law firm gets thousands of applications, speaking honestly, it is harder to stand out. It used to be the case that as long as you got a 2-1 at university, you didn't worry too much about whether it was a low 2-1 or a high 2-1, unless you were applying to some law firms like the Magic Circle law firm Slaughter & May, or some of the smaller US law firms like Cleary and Davis Polk. They were always rumored to care about very high grades. But it seems this is now filtered down. More law firms are explicit about the grades they look for. Law firms like Linklaters now explicitly state you should be on track for a 2-1 in every module. I even spoke to a candidate this week. They received a first-class degree at university, and the law firm still gave them feedback at the application stage that they were rejected for getting ABB at A-level. Now, I don't know if this is a situation where these are just invisible filters that used to always happen, but they're now becoming more visible, or if some law firms now care more about grades. I think both make sense. For some law firms, especially the US elite firms, they use grades as a better signal for future technical ability, especially if AI now makes it easy to write applications. Now, this was really brought to the forefront this year. When I was an applicant, after you passed the application stage, you'd either have to complete a test called a Watson-Glaser or a verbal reasoning test. Sometimes there was what we called a situational judgment test as well, or a telephone interview. I remember at the time there was a firm, Herbert Smith Freehills, now HSF Kramer. It was known as being pretty unusual because it also had a logical test. But then you also had, for many law firms, especially US firms, you could just jump straight to the interview. Now today, more UK law firms have different sets of stages and more steps in the process. There's Amberjack, Arctic Shores, Michigan's got an AI chatbot, there's situational tests, written exercises, video interviews at the start of the process, and then multi-part questions on a video interview. All of this means the time spent on any one law firm application has gone up, and it's frustrating for applicants to finally progress with a law firm application only to be rejected. I don't think this has ever been harder. Honestly, this is probably the biggest reason. The law firm process has long been pretty opaque. When I was going through it, I remember getting to my first interview, being asked about the difference between an asset sale and a share sale. It's kind of this weird situation to be tested on questions where you just haven't been taught them at university or school, but you have to learn them, but no one teaches you. But now that information is very widespread. Private equity, M&A, finance, applicants get taught to learn about these sooner in case they get tested on this. You'll see, I literally in my last video did a 40-minute video breaking down finance. And the same goes for application advice and interview technique. People get better, which means it's harder to pass any one round. Even this week, I spoke to someone that spent 20 to 25 days on one application. He was reading McKinsey reports, Big Four trend reports, company annual reports, and he couldn't pass the second stage. I'd say these days you're pretty unusual if you get a training contract in your first year of applying. If you learn fast and have pretty good grades, you should be fine to get it in the second cycle, but for many people, it takes 3 years plus. This is similar to my last point, but if everyone uses the same resources and follows the same advice, most applications look the same, even if they're good. It's why I tell applicants don't mention awards to back up your motivations for a firm or the same kind of rankings, because everyone does it. And I hear this from the firm side constantly. Every single grad recruitment team I speak to says the same thing. We don't want more applications. We want better applications from people who actually understand us. Lastly, I see a lot of applicants this year get frustrated by the lack of feedback, and it's only now heightened that law firms have introduced so many stages. In some ways, that firm I mentioned earlier, the one that rejected the applicant for their A-levels, was actually been quite helpful. At least they know, okay, it wasn't my application, it was my A-level grades. But either way, the lack of feedback makes it hard to know where to improve. I've spoken to applicants who've been applying for 9 years straight. They know they've gotten better, but they have no idea what's not working. And from the firm's perspective, look, they can't genuinely give that kind of feedback at scale. If you've got 2,000 applicants, you can't write a paragraph to each person explaining why. But what you do need as an applicant is this ability to confront hard truths about what's not working and adapt your approach. That's a mark of a good applicant in this process. Okay, I've kind of just told you why getting a training contract is so hard, and I feel a bit bad now because when I say all of this, I'm mindful that you might think, okay, is there even a point in applying? Can I become a commercial lawyer? Now, as hard as this process is, and as much as this process is getting harder, what hasn't changed is how you stand out. It's just the tools to get there are now different. So I want to have a frank conversation with you about what I tell you to do if you were sitting next to me. To get a training contract with the best law firms, you need 8 things. 1 is good grades. 2, a deep understanding of your motivations. You need to go out and meet law firms, to be personal, have a high level of commercial awareness, have many reps and enough shots on goal, and you must be willing to take on feedback but discard bad advice. So I'm going to take each of these in turn. First, get good grades. If you're in your first or second year of university, for example, I'd focus on getting the best grades you can. You don't need a first, but if you can, go for it. And even if you land at a mid 2-1, it just means you won't be held back from any firms because of your grades. If you finish studying, don't worry about this one. Obviously, it's not something you can control, but we can control the other things. Second is to deeply understand your motivations. Now, for the last 8 years, I've reviewed thousands of applications for students applying to all of the big law firms. 95% of people are just too vague about why they want to be a commercial lawyer or why they're applying to a particular firm. Put simply, it's really obvious when you are writing to impress, when you haven't thought deeply about why you want to be a commercial lawyer, or whether you actually want to apply to a law firm. It's not really your fault, but there is a technique there to knowing how to communicate those things. And so quality is extremely important. That means fine-tuning every single word on your written application, making sure every sentence is there for a reason, deeply understanding what makes a US firm like Kirkland different from a Paul Weiss, different from a Simpson Thacher. And that takes time, which is why so few people do it. But it's not hard in the sense that building a robot is hard. It just takes a willingness to dedicate enough time to do it. And that's why so few people do, but it becomes a necessity when a firm is getting these thousands and thousands of applications. Now, closely tied to the previous point, this is like going out and meeting law firms. One of the best ways to show your motivations is to build a personal connection with a firm. And this is what I mean by doing things that most candidates won't do. It's quite inconvenient to find the time to join a virtual webinar or meet a firm in person. And I mean this if you're a graduate too. Some graduates will be like, oh, but law firms only have events for students. But, if you go on a firm's website, you can find firms running webinars for clients usually, but some are open to everyone. Again, that's a good example of how do I go out of my way to meet a firm, because then I have something more specific to talk about in my applications and in my interviews, but it's also something that most people won't do. Now, being personal has always stayed true. The best applications are really, really personal. I feel you really know the firm. I feel you know why you're a good fit. Your interview answers show a genuine desire to join. That's the ultimate superpower in a law firm application, especially when thousands of people will use AI to help them write an application. Now, if you practice your writing, you'll know that AI makes an application sound surprisingly good, but also devoid of all the quirks in writing that make the writing human and more personal. And that's something that's really translates in an application. The same applies to an interview. Standing out comes from knowing yourself, knowing the firm, and not being too scripted, but bringing that real polished self to an interview. Next, the best applicants start their commercial awareness now. What I mean by that is they understand the big themes of, okay, what's going on in the news, whether it's like tariffs, geopolitical issues, and they can understand and talk to you about topics like debt, equity, M&A, financial statements, and more. But this is also where I feel AI really helps. Right now, see AI as a personal tutor that can teach you about anything you want to know. If I was going through the application process, I'd get ChatGPT to teach me about one topic a day. And the beauty is it has like unlimited patience. So you can ask it to explain a topic that you don't understand 100 times. Ask as many questions as you can think of. Ask it to explain it to you as a 10-year-old. Ask it to draw diagrams until you've mastered a concept. I think this will really help if you are struggling with commercial awareness. Use AI to make it as useful for you as possible. Next is many reps, like learning how to write a really good application and how to perform well at interview is just a skill that can be practiced. And that doesn't mean being fake. It means understanding that your application is a written presentation of you, your motivations, and your skills. And there's a skill to understanding, okay, what do I put in my first sentence? Or how do I structure my answer? How do I write clearly and precisely? And the same applies to an interview. So you get good at both through reps. If you have an interview coming up, practice 5 mock interviews with different people. Get people to read your applications, make some changes, get better. And the same applies to online tests. I know there is like so many stages right now, but it also just means you can get better at all of them through lots of practice. Now you need enough shots on goal. It's very hard to get a training contract if you apply to a small number of firms. What you do want is quality, but when a firm receives, say, 3,000, 4,000 applications, they might miss you out, right? Maybe by luck, or you apply a bit too late, or it's just not your day and you're not performing as highly on the online tests. So you need to give yourself enough shots so you have enough chances. Now, how many applications do you write? I usually say 20 as the bar, 20 quality applications. And I say that because if I said 10, people would be like, okay, I should just do 8. So rather you landed on 15 to 20, that's a good enough number to give you enough chances. Now, lastly, take on feedback, but discard bad advice. My main point here is that getting a training contract is just a case of practicing becoming really good at every part of the process. It takes a lot of work and immersion and willing to confront difficult feedback and honestly like a lot of rejection. But there's absolutely no reason you watching this can't do it and get the training contract. What you don't want to do is be the applicant who's applied for 4 law firms each cycle for 6 years, or you've sent 52 bad applications and never try to work out like how to make it better. You need a very strong willingness to self-correct, how to get better, and you should be willing to take feedback from law firms as a data point. Say they reject you, you may not like the feedback they give you, but it's just useful information to know what did they pick up about your interview performance. But also at the same time, as more information is out there, there is a lot of bad advice out there. I always say, and the same applies to any of this advice I give, discard anything you don't agree with. You'll stand out if you work out what you think, lean into your strengths, and take just the stuff that you find useful to you.